The air in St. Augustine's was thick with the scent of lilies and old stone, a fragrance I'd always associated with hope. But as the organist began the prelude to my daughter's wedding, a cold dread snaked around my heart. My name is Marlene Carter. For 56 years, I believed that love and hard work were shields against the world's darkness. But on that sun-drenched afternoon, standing outside a cracked wooden door, I learned that some monsters don't hide in the shadows. They wear tuxedos, smile for the cameras, and whisper their venom when they think no one is listening. The weight of the small silver locket in my palm was a familiar comfort. It was a gift from my daughter Grace on my 40th birthday, a simple, heart-shaped piece of silver that held a tiny, faded picture of her gap-toothed 6-year-old smile. Now, 16 years later, that same smile was about to be given to a man who didn't deserve it. I smoothed down the silk of my dress, the deep emerald green a stark contrast to the pale, sun-bleached stones of the church corridor. Everything was perfect. The flowers, the music, the guests murmuring in the pews. A perfect, beautiful lie. Just a few more minutes, and Grace would walk down that aisle, her arm linked with mine, towards a future I had prayed for since the day she was born. A future filled with love, laughter, and the kind of quiet joy that had been so rare in my own life. Since her father, my beloved John, had passed away 15 years ago, it had been just the two of us against the world. Together, we had poured our blood, sweat, and tears into Willow Creek, our family's orchard. It was more than just land. It was our legacy, a sprawling tapestry of mango trees that had been in our family for generations. Every sunrise, I would walk through the rows of trees, the sweet scent of the blossoms a reminder of my husband's enduring presence. The orchard was our story, written in the gnarled bark of the trees and the rich, dark soil. Cedar Ridge was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. The Carters of Willow Creek were respected, a testament to our hard work and the quality of our fruit. People would stop me at the farmer's market, their hands filled with our sun-ripened mangoes, and tell me I had done John proud. And Grace, my sweet, gentle Grace, had grown up in the heart of it all, a child of the orchard, with the spirit as free and untamed as the summer wind. She had a heart that saw only the good in people, a naivety that was both her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. I had been on my way to the bridal suite, my heart fluttering with a nervous excitement, when a burst of laughter from the groom's dressing room stopped me in my tracks. The door was ajar, a dark sliver in the ancient wood, and through it I could hear them. Tyler and his groomsmen, their voices loud and boisterous. I paused, a smile on my lips, expecting to hear the nervous jokes of a groom on his wedding day. But what I heard instead was a poison that seeped into the air and chilled me to the bone. "I can't believe you're actually going through with this, man," one of his friends slurred, his voice thick with champagne. Tyler's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound that bore no resemblance to the warm, charming chuckle he always used with Grace. "Hey, a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do," he said, his tone dripping with a smug, cruel arrogance. "The thought of spending the rest of my life with that pudgy little wallflower makes my skin crawl. But her mother owns half of Cedar Ridge. Willow Creek alone is worth a fortune. I can put up with a few years of her doe-eyed adoration for that kind of a payday." Their laughter echoed in the stone hallway, a wave of cruel, careless mirth that crashed over me, stealing the air from my lungs. I froze, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The locket in my other hand dug into my palm, its sharp edges a painful reminder of the love that was being so casually desecrated. My daughter, my beautiful, trusting Grace. A paycheck, a means to an end. My throat tightened, a knot of grief and rage forming in my chest. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar, comforting walls of the church suddenly feeling like a cage. This couldn't be happening. Not to my Grace. She was in the bridal suite just down the hall, her heart filled with love and hope, completely unaware of the viper she was about to welcome into her life. I should have turned and walked away, pretended I hadn't heard. I should have preserved the fragile peace of this day, for Grace's sake. But a primal, maternal instinct, the same one that had woken me in the dead of night when she was a baby with a fever, kept me rooted to the spot. I had to hear it all. I had to know the full extent of his deceit. Through the crack in the door, I could see them. A tableau of smug, self-satisfied young men in their tailored tuxedos, their faces flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Tyler was preening in front of the mirror, adjusting his bow tie, a smirk playing on his lips. Seriously, though, another groomsman chimed in, you're a genius. You've got the old lady wrapped around your little finger. She probably thinks you're some kind of saint. She's a sentimental old fool, Tyler scoffed, his reflection sneering back at him. Thinks I'm some kind of savior come to rescue her precious orchard from the big bad world. Little does she know, I'm the one who's going to own it all. And once I do, Grace can cry herself to sleep on her satin pillows for all I care. The cruelty of his words was a physical blow. I could feel the blood drain from my face, my knees threatening to buckle. I pressed my hand against the cold stone wall, the rough texture a grounding force in the swirling chaos of my mind. The organ music swelled, a beautiful, haunting melody that now sounded like a funeral dirge. The truth was a shard of glass in my heart, and with every beat, it was cutting deeper. I stumbled back from the door, the sound of their laughter fading as I moved down the hallway, my mind a maelstrom of shock and horror. My first instinct was to storm into that room, to rip the mask from his handsome face and expose him for the monster he was. I imagined Grace's face, her beautiful, radiant smile, and the thought of shattering her happiness was a pain almost as sharp as the betrayal itself. She loved him. She believed in the fairy tale he had so carefully constructed for her. If I destroyed it now, in this public, brutal way, she would never forgive me. She would see me as a jealous, overprotective mother, and the truth would be lost in the wreckage of her broken heart. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning in my lungs. I had to be smart. I had to be calm. For Grace. I would find the right moment, a quiet, private space where I could tell her the truth, away from the prying eyes and whispers of the wedding guests. I would break her heart to save her soul. When I entered the bridal suite, the scene that greeted me was so achingly beautiful, it almost broke me. Grace was sitting in front of a large ornate mirror, a vision in white lace and silk. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass window caught the delicate beading on her veil, creating a halo effect around her head. Her eyes, the same warm chocolate brown as her father's, were sparkling with a joy so pure and untainted, it was like a knife to my already wounded heart. Zoe, her maid of honor and best friend since kindergarten, was fussing with the train of her dress, her brow furrowed in concentration. I waited until the photographer and the makeup artist had bustled out of the room, their cheerful chatter a jarring counterpoint to the turmoil in my soul. I closed the door softly, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice a hoarse whisper, "can I talk to you for a moment?" Alone, Grace turned, her smile faltering as she saw the look on my face. "Mom? What's wrong? You're as white as a sheet." I took a deep breath and forced myself to meet her gaze. "It's about Tyler," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I overheard something. Something terrible." Her expression clouded with confusion. "What are you talking about?" I had to tell her. I had to make her see. "He doesn't love you, Grace. He's using you. He said he's only marrying you for Willow Creek, for our money." Grace's eyes widened, her lower lip trembling. She looked from me to Zoe, a silent plea for help. Before she could speak, Zoe stepped forward. her expression a mask of cool disapproval. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, this is not the time or the place for this," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "Grace is about to get married. You're just nervous. You're probably misinterpreting something you heard." "I know what I heard, Zoe," I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. "He called her names, cruel, horrible names, but as I looked into Zoe's eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A flicker of something that wasn't concern, but complicity. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a look of feigned sympathy, but I had seen it. And in that moment, I knew I was truly alone in this. "Mom, please," Grace whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't do this. Not today. I love him, and he loves me." The words were a dagger to my heart. She had made her choice. She had chosen to believe the lie. The church bells began to toll, a slow, solemn peal that seemed to mock my despair. The bridesmaids burst into the room, a flurry of pastel dresses and excited chatter, and the moment was lost. Grace wiped her eyes. A fragile, watery smile plastered on her face. "Let's just get through this, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. And then she was gone, swept away by the tide of tradition and hope, leaving me standing alone in a room that suddenly felt cold and empty. From my seat in the front pew, the ceremony was a blur of images and sounds that made no sense. The scent of the lilies was cloying, the organ music a discordant drone. I watched as my daughter, my beautiful, broken daughter, walked down the aisle, her smile a masterpiece of self-deception. Tyler stood at the altar, his expression a perfect blend of love and adoration, a wolf in sheep's clothing. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, a wave of nausea washed over me. The guests erupted in applause, their faces beaming with joy. I was the only one who knew that this was not a beginning, but an end. The end of my daughter's innocence, the end of our family's peace. And as they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, a sea of smiling faces, I knew that this was just the beginning of my fight. I would not let him win. I would not let him destroy my daughter. I would bide my time, and I would wait for the moment to strike. And when I did, I would show him what a mother's love was truly capable of. The reception was a study in exquisite torture. Golden fairy lights were strung through the ancient oak trees in the churchyard, casting a warm, magical glow over the laughing, dancing guests. The air was filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and the happy murmur of conversations. To the outside world, it was a perfect celebration of love and new beginnings. But for me, it was a wake. I stood on the periphery, a ghost at the feast, a glass of untouched champagne in my hand, watching the man who had just stolen my daughter's heart work the room with the practiced ease of a seasoned con artist. He was a chameleon, effortlessly charming the old ladies, sharing a hearty laugh with the men, and whispering sweet nothings in my daughter's ear. No one saw the darkness that lurked behind his perfect smile. No one but me. The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and polite conversations. The whispers started almost immediately, spreading through Cedar Ridge like a poison. Marlene Carter tried to sabotage her own daughter's wedding. She's always been so possessive of Grace. She just couldn't let go. The women I had known my entire life, the ones who had shared coffee with me at the local diner and swapped gardening tips over the fence, now averted their eyes when I walked by. I was the villain in my own story, the crazy, jealous mother who couldn't stand to see her daughter happy. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, to shake them all until they saw him for what he was. But I held my tongue. Patience, I told myself. Patience would be my weapon. The truth had a way of revealing itself, and when it did, I would be ready. A week after the wedding, I drove to Grace's new house, a charming little cottage with a white picket fence and a garden full of rose bushes. I told myself it was a casual visit, a mother checking in on her newlywed daughter. But a gnawing unease had taken root in my gut, a feeling I couldn't shake. Grace opened the door, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. "Mom!" What a surprise. I wish you'd called first. Over her shoulder, I could see Tyler sitting at a large mahogany desk that seemed to dominate the small living room. It was covered in stacks of papers, neat and orderly, a stark contrast to the cozy, lived-in feel of the rest of the house. "Just thought I'd drop by, see how you're settling in," I said, my eyes drawn to the documents on the desk. "What's all this?" "Oh, you know, just business," Tyler said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Grace is just helping me with some routine paperwork for the company." But as I stepped closer, my blood ran cold. The words on the top page were anything but routine. Power of attorney, collateral agreement, pledge of assets, and beneath it all, in bold, stark letters, was the name. Willow Creek Orchard. Grace, my sweet, trusting Grace, was signing her birthright away, her pen gliding across the pages with a careless ease that made my stomach churn. She didn't even read what she was signing. She just smiled at her husband, her eyes filled with a love so blind it was terrifying. He wasn't just after her heart. He was after our home, our legacy, everything my family had worked for generations to build. And in that moment, I knew that my silence was no longer an option. It was a betrayal. A few minutes later, Grace excused herself to use the restroom. Tyler's phone buzzed, and he stepped out onto the porch, his voice a low, confidential murmur. The room was empty. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands trembled, but my mind was a laser beam of focus. I moved to the desk, my movements swift and silent. I lifted the top page and began snapping pictures with my phone, the click of the shutter, a deafening roar in the quiet house. Mortgage, transfer of title, loan guarantee. The words burned into my brain, each one a nail in the coffin of our family's future. The sound of the toilet flushing was my cue. I placed the papers back exactly as they had been and was scrolling through my phone, my face a mask of casual indifference, when Grace returned. "Everything okay, Mom?" she asked, her brow furrowed with a hint of concern. I forced a weak smile. "Just thinking, honey," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just thinking about how to fight back." Chapter 20. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words on those documents, the cold, clinical language of theft. At the crack of dawn, I was in my car, driving to the one person I knew I could trust, Henry Lawson. Henry had been our family's lawyer for as long as I could remember. His office, a dusty, cluttered space above the town's hardware store, smelled of old books and stale coffee, but to me, it was a sanctuary. I laid out the photos on his desk, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. Henry listened in silence, his expression growing grimmer with each image. When I was finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. "Marlene," he said, his voice grave, "this is worse than I thought. If Grace has signed these, Tyler has complete control of Willow Creek. He can sell it, mortgage it, use it as collateral for his own business ventures. He can do whatever he wants." The words were a punch to the gut. "So he's stealing it all, right out from under our noses." Henry nodded, his eyes filled with a grim understanding. "And he's counting on your silence. He's counting on Grace's love for him and her loyalty to you to keep you from speaking out." He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "We can't confront him. Not yet. We need more than just these photos. We need irrefutable proof. We need to catch him in his own trap." For the first time since that horrible day at the church, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. I had a plan. I had an ally. The next day, Henry called. He had a man for me to meet, a private investigator named Nate Delgado. Nate was nothing like the grizzled, trench-coat-wearing detectives I had seen in the movies. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a calm, steady presence that immediately put me at ease. We met in a small, out-of-the-way diner, the air thick with the smell of fried bacon and coffee. I told him everything, my voice cracking as I recounted the overheard conversation, the forged documents, the web of lies that had ensnared my daughter. Nate listened patiently, taking meticulous notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When I was finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I'll find out what he's really up to, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice a quiet reassurance. "Give me a week." 3 days later, he called. "You might want to sit down for this," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The information he had uncovered was a bombshell. Tyler wasn't just a con artist, he was a philanderer. Nate had photos of him in Chicago, hand in hand with a woman named Sabrina Cole, a high-level executive at a large investment bank. There were hotel receipts, dinner bills, and apartment lease in his company's name, but the most damning piece of evidence was an audio recording. Nate had managed to place a listening device in Tyler's car, and he had captured a conversation between Tyler and Sabrina, a conversation that laid bare the full extent of his depravity. "The orchard will be mine within the month," Tyler's voice sneered through the static of the recording. "Grace is so head over heels in love with me, she'd sign her own death warrant if I asked her to. And her mother? The old lady is too blinded by her own pride to see what's happening right in front of her." My stomach dropped, the betrayal a cold, hard knot in my gut. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a fundamental lack of decency, a complete and utter disregard for the sanctity of the vows he had taken just a few weeks before. But Nate wasn't finished. "There's someone else you need to talk to," he said. "Tyler's older brother, Mason Brooks. They're estranged, haven't spoken in years." According to Nate, Mason and Tyler had once been business partners. Tyler had cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared, leaving Mason bankrupt and their parents heartbroken. If anyone knew the depths of Tyler's depravity, it was his own brother. I found Mason in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the kind of place that smelled of stale beer and regret. He looked older than his years, his face etched with a bitterness that seemed to have settled deep into his bones. "If you're here to defend him, you can save your breath," he said, his voice a low growl, before I had even had a chance to speak. "I'm not here to defend him," I said, sliding an envelope across the sticky table. "I'm here because he's trying to do to my daughter what he did to you." The envelope contained the photos of Tyler and Sabrina and the audio recording. Mason's face was a stony mask as he looked at the pictures, but when I played the recording, a flicker of something, pain, anger, regret, crossed his features. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing in the quiet bar. "That son of a bitch," he muttered, his voice thick with a rage that had been simmering for years. "He never changes. He destroyed our family. It's about time someone stopped him." He looked at me, his eyes blazing with a newfound resolve. "I'll testify," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I'll tell the whole world what kind of a man my brother really is." And just like that, I had another ally in my fight. The tide was turning. The truth was coming to light, and I would not rest until my daughter was free. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Henry, Nate, and I became an unlikely team, a trio united by a single purpose: to expose Tyler for the fraud he was, and to save Grace from the ruin he had planned for her. Henry worked tirelessly, poring over bank records and legal documents, piecing together the intricate puzzle of Tyler's deceit. Nate's investigation was a masterclass in quiet efficiency. He traced every transaction, every phone call, every lie, creating a timeline of Tyler's fraudulent activities that was both damning and heartbreaking. Mason provided a sworn affidavit, a detailed account of Tyler's past crimes, his words a powerful testament to the long shadow of his brother's greed. My nights were spent at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and legal pads, the warm glow of the old brass lamp casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The weight of it all was immense, a physical pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. But with every new piece of evidence, every new revelation, my resolve hardened. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a warrior, fighting for my daughter's future, for our family's legacy. "We're ready, Marlene," Henry said, his voice a calm, steady presence over the phone. "We have enough to file charges: fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. The DA is on board. But you have to be strong. You can't let him know that we're coming for him." I promised him I would, but it was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. To sit across the dinner table from my daughter, to see the love and trust in her eyes as she looked at the man who was systematically destroying her, and to say nothing, it was a betrayal of a different kind, a necessary evil that tore at my soul. The day of the arraignment was a cold gray morning, the sky a blanket of bruised clouds. The courtroom was a somber, wood-paneled room, filled with the hushed whispers of the townspeople who had come to witness the spectacle. I saw them all: the farmers, the shopkeepers, the women who had once turned their backs on me. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, pity, and a dawning sense of shame. I sat at the prosecutor's table, Henry on one side, Grace on the other. She was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She still didn't understand what was happening, still couldn't believe that the man she loved was capable of such monstrous deceit. Tyler arrived in a perfectly tailored suit, his handsome face a mask of confident arrogance. But as his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of something else, a sliver of fear, a dawning realization that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, called the case. "The people of the state of Iowa versus Tyler Brooks." Henry was the first to speak. His voice was calm and measured, but his words were a sledgehammer, each one chipping away at Tyler's facade of respectability. He laid out the timeline of the fraud, the forged documents, the shell corporations, the secret bank accounts. The evidence was irrefutable, a mountain of deceit that was impossible to deny. Then came the audio recording. Tyler's own voice filled the courtroom, dripping with arrogance and contempt. "That orchard will be mine soon," he sneered. "The old lady's too proud to see it coming." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, a small choked sob escaping her lips. The color drained from her face, and for a moment I thought she was going to faint. I squeezed her hand, my heart breaking for her, for the pain and betrayal she was feeling. When Mason took the stand, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. He spoke with a quiet dignity, his voice filled with a deep, abiding sadness. He told the story of his and Tyler's shared childhood, of their dreams of building a business together. And then he told the story of how Tyler had shattered those dreams, how he had stolen their life savings and disappeared, leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered lives in his wake. He spoke of his father, a proud, hard-working man who had died of a broken heart, his spirit crushed by the shame of his son's betrayal. Tyler's composure finally cracked. "He's lying!" he shouted, jumping to his feet. "He's always been jealous of me." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, decisive crack. "Mr. Brooks, you will be silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Henry's closing statement was a masterpiece of quiet, righteous anger. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "this is not just a case of financial fraud. It is a case of profound betrayal, a betrayal of trust, a betrayal of family, a betrayal of the sacred vows of marriage." The judge looked at the mountain of evidence, at the faces of the people Tyler had wronged. And then she turned to Grace. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice softening with a hint of compassion, "is there anything you would like to say?" Grace stood, her legs trembling so violently I thought she was going to collapse. She gripped the edge of the wooden bench, her knuckles white. She looked so small, so fragile, a pale, wilting flower in the harsh light of the courtroom. But then she lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, a bell that rang with the clarity of newfound truth. "I was blind," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I believed in a fantasy. I believed that love was enough to conquer all. But I see now that love without honesty is just a beautiful cage. I was deceived, Your Honor, and today I want my life back." The courtroom was silent. the air thick with a palpable sense of awe. Grace turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you." I stood and took her hand, my own shaking. "You believed in him, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with tears. "Now it's time to believe in yourself." And in that moment, I saw her not as my fragile, broken daughter, but as a woman of incredible strength and resilience, a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged, scarred, but whole. The verdict was swift and decisive. Tyler Brooks was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary. His accomplice, Sabrina Cole, was charged with conspiracy and barred from the financial industry for life. As the bailiffs led Tyler away in handcuffs, he looked back at Grace, his face a mask of disbelief. But she didn't meet his gaze. She had already turned away, her eyes fixed on the future. A future that was finally her own. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm, hopeful light. Grace stood beside me, her face pale but her expression serene. She squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything we had been through and everything we had overcome. "It's over, Mom," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet relief. I pulled her into a hug, my heart overflowing with a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice muffled in her hair. "It's just beginning." The weeks that followed were a time of quiet healing. Grace moved back home to Willow Creek, her small cottage on the edge of town a painful reminder of a life that had been built on lies. The orchard, with its familiar rhythms and timeless beauty, became her sanctuary. I would often find her in the early mornings, walking barefoot through the dew-kissed grass, her face tilted up to the rising sun, a look of quiet contemplation on her face. "It smells like home," she said to me one morning, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. I'd forgotten what home smelled like. She threw herself into the business of the orchard, learning every aspect of its operation with a fierce, quiet determination. She pored over invoices, met with the workers, and walked the rows of mango trees, her brow furrowed in concentration. The shy, uncertain girl who had been so easily deceived was gone, replaced by a woman of quiet strength and purpose. The workers, who had known her since she was a little girl, began to call her Miss Grace, a title of respect that had once been reserved for me. Watching her blossom, watching her reclaim her life and her legacy, was a source of pride so profound it brought tears to my eyes. We talked, really talked for the first time in years. We talked about Tyler, about the betrayal, about the pain. But we also talked about forgiveness, about resilience, about the unbreakable bond between a mother and a daughter. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Grace said something that I will never forget. "Pain is a harsh teacher," she said, her voice soft and thoughtful, "but it teaches you lessons that love never can." It was in that moment that I knew I had to share our story. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. As the seasons changed, so did Grace. The sadness in her eyes was replaced by a quiet confidence, the fragile smile by a hearty, genuine laugh. She joined a local running club, her body growing as strong and resilient as her spirit. She took a class on sustainable agriculture at the community college, her mind sharp and eager to learn. She was no longer a victim of her past, but the architect of her future. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few months after the trial, Henry called. "Marlene," he said, his voice laced with an unusual excitement. "I think you and Grace should come down to my office. There's something you need to see." We drove into town, a sense of nervous anticipation hanging in the air. Henry was waiting for us, a large, dusty ledger open on his desk. "I was going through some of your father's old files," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And I found this." He pointed to a page in the ledger, a series of entries in my husband's familiar, elegant script. It was a record of a series of investments he had made years ago. Small, speculative investments in a then-unknown tech company. "John was a smart man," Henry said, a fond smile on his face. He had a good feeling about this one. He handed us a statement from a brokerage firm. The numbers were staggering. My husband, my quiet, unassuming John, had left us a fortune. A nest egg that had been quietly growing for years, a safety net we never knew we had. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a letter, addressed to Grace in her father's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it. "My dearest Grace," it began. "If you are reading this, it means that I am no longer with you. But I want you to know that I am always watching over you. I have left you this gift, not to make you rich, but to make you free. Free to follow your dreams. Free to make your own mistakes. Free to build a life that is truly your own. But there is one more thing you need to know, a secret I have kept to protect you. Before I met your mother, I was married to a woman who was not who she seemed. She was a con artist, a woman who preyed on the kindness of others. Her name was Eleanor Brooks." The name hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor Brooks, Tyler's mother. The woman who had raised the monster who had almost destroyed my daughter. It all made sense. The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree. The letter went on to explain that John had divorced Eleanor and had spent years trying to track her down to make sure she couldn't harm anyone else. He had never found her, but he had left a detailed file with Henry, a file that contained all the evidence he had gathered against her. "I'm giving you this information not for revenge, my sweet girl," the letter concluded, "but for justice. Use it to protect yourself, to protect others, to make sure that no one else has to suffer the way that I did." The tears were streaming down Grace's face as she finished the letter. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of grief and a newfound sense of purpose. "He knew," she whispered. "All this time, he was protecting me." That night, as we sat on the porch, the letter and the ledger on the table between us, a sense of peace settled over me, a peace that was deeper and more profound than any I had ever known. The truth had finally come home. The next day, we called Nate. He was shocked by the revelation, but he immediately got to work. With the evidence John had collected, the authorities were able to build a case against Eleanor Brooks, a case that linked her to a string of scams and fraudulent schemes that stretched back for decades. A few weeks later, we got the news. Eleanor Brooks had been arrested. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, paying for the sins of her past. That evening, Grace and I stood on the porch, overlooking the orchard that was our home, our legacy, our future. The mango trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering a song of resilience and hope. Grace slipped her arm through mine, her head resting on my shoulder. "We did it, Mom," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "We finally did it." I smiled, my heart full to bursting. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Your father did it. He planted the seeds of justice all those years ago. We just helped them grow." And as the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, I knew that our story wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about the enduring power of love, the unbreakable bonds of family, and the quiet, unassuming strength of a good man who had loved his daughter enough to protect her, even from beyond the grave. If our story has touched you, tell me where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And remember, the sweetest revenge is not in seeing your enemies fall, but in rising from the ashes, stronger and more beautiful than before.